Good day, and welcome again to Learning Pharmacology with me, Nurse Myron. For today's video, we will be discussing anti-inflammatory drugs. For our full disclosure, I am not affiliated with any of the manufacturers of the drugs or other items mentioned in this lecture. The mention of such brand names are only in passing and for educational purposes only, and are not for commercial promotion. I have no actual or potential conflict of interest in relation to this presentation. So, let us begin with a review of the physiology of inflammation. Inflammation is the body's natural immune response to injury, pathogens like bacteria, viruses, and fungi, traumatic injury, damage, or irritants. It is inherently a protective mechanism aimed at alerting the body against harm. Ultimately, it leads to healing tissue. Inflammation can be classified as either acute or chronic. Acute inflammation is immediate, but also subsides quickly. It is often a short-term response to bacterial pathogens or physical injury. Acute inflammation involves many different kinds of cells. They primarily involve neutrophils that act as the body's first line of defense. Other cells include, first, your basophils, which are important in immune surveillance and mediating allergic reactions. Second, your eosinophils, responsible for helminths and other parasites. And third, you have your mononuclear cells, for example, your monocytes, which act as emergency responders in patrolling against pathogens, which later mature into macrophages that will act as phagocytes to eat up bacteria, viruses, and other pathogens. Acute inflammation is aimed at healing. On the other hand, chronic inflammation is long-term. It can persist for months or even years, causing damage and contributing to diseases like cancer, diabetes, and heart disease. Causes of chronic inflammation include persistent and repeated acute inflammation, persistent exposure to foreign bodies, and autoimmune diseases. The cells involved in chronic inflammation include monocytes, macrophages, lymphocytes, and plasma cells. However, unlike acute inflammation, chronic inflammation often results in tissue destruction, such as fibrosis or necrosis, leading to permanent injury. Inflammation has four cardinal signs: dolor or pain, calor or heat, rubor or redness, and tumor or swelling. These were described by the 1st century Roman encyclopedist Aulus Cornelius Celsus. These four signs often combine to cause a fifth sign called functio laesa, or temporary loss of function. This fifth sign is often due to pain or swelling. Functio laesa was added much later. Inflammation usually starts with some stimulus, like a pathogen, for example your fungi, bacteria, or viruses. A chemical such as allergens, irritants, or toxins, or physical injury. Sometimes, injury may be the result of overwork or strain, such as after a long jog or an intense workout. The muscles feel sore. That is still attributed to the inflammatory process attempting to repair the overused muscles. The goal of inflammation is first to respond to the stimuli and later to restore balance to the body. Often, that includes eliminating the cause of tissue injury, clearing out chemicals like toxins, allergens, and irritants, and the necrotic or dead cells to start tissue repair. Inflammation can be triggered by external and internal factors. our immune system can mount the inflammatory response. Let us take, for example, an injury followed by exposure to a pathogen. When there is tissue damage or exposure to these foreign bodies, our cells respond to the pathogen-associated molecular patterns or PAMPs and damage-associated molecular patterns or DAMPs. These chemicals serve as signaling molecules to activate the immune system. The inflammatory process usually starts with either macrophages or mast cells. Mast cells contain granules that carry different inflammatory mediators like histamine, serotonin, cytokines, and eicosanoids. The latter includes prostaglandins and leukotrienes. These inflammatory mediators promote the permeability of nearby capillaries. The release of cytokines causes capillaries to vasodilate, thereby increasing vascular permeability. This promotes plasma proteins and fluids to leave the circulation. Meanwhile, macrophages start to eat up the invading pathogens. Likewise, endothelial cells release nitric oxide, which promotes further vasodilation of the capillaries and making them more permeable. This promotes the extravasation from the blood into the tissues of the injured site. Neutrophils are the first leukocytes to arrive during the acute inflammatory process. As they arrive, they immediately start phagocytosing the pathogens in the damaged cells. After then, they undergo apoptosis, destroying themselves together with all the pathogens that they have consumed. Meanwhile, soluble proteins called the complement system get activated in the presence of pathogens. Once complement proteins are activated, they attract more leukocytes and attach themselves to the pathogens in order for easier and faster identification of the leukocytes. Some pathogens also have the capability to directly kill pathogens. During this process, T lymphocytes are activated. Here, the body's adaptive immune system comes in after some time to further help in the immune response. Meanwhile, platelets and clotting factors from the blood plasma arrive. They help in blood clot formation to close the wound. This helps to stop the bleeding, thereby preventing additional pathogens from entering the body. This also helps in the process of tissue repair. All these factors contribute to the development of heat, redness, swelling, tenderness, and pain, the cardinal signs of inflammation that we have discussed earlier. Now we delve deeper by looking into the chemical cascades involved in inflammation. These are highly coordinated series of molecular events designed to protect the body from harmful stimuli. The process involves the release of specialized mediators, the activation of intracellular signaling pathways, and the recruitment of immune cells. During acute inflammation, mast cells release vasoactive amines like histamine and serotonin. These chemicals then activate phospholipids, which is then converted into arachidonic acid by hydrolysis via the enzyme phospholipase A2. These chemicals are the ones responsible in increasing vascular permeability and vasodilation, as we have seen earlier. We now enter the arachidonic acid pathway. Here, arachidonic acid is converted into prostaglandins via intermediate compounds PGG2, and PGH2. Prostaglandin is then converted by cyclooxygenase. COX-1 converts prostaglandins into thromboxane A2. This chemical is responsible for fever, pain, and inflammation. It is also responsible for platelet aggregation, which controls bleeding. On the other hand, COX-2 converts prostaglandins into specific forms like PGE2, PGF2-alpha, PGD2, and prostacyclin. PGE2 is a mediator of inflammation, fever, pain, and allergies. PGF2-alpha is responsible for uterine contractions. Meanwhile, PGD2 triggers allergic inflammation. And lastly, prostacyclin is a potent vasodilator and inhibitor of platelet aggregation. This counteracts the effect of thromboxane. Meanwhile, prostaglandin E2 stimulates nitric oxide production by activating endothelial nitric oxide synthase. Nitric oxide promotes vascular relaxation, vasodilation, and increased permeability. At this point, we can now see how dolor, rubor, calor, and tumor are triggered in this cascade. On the other hand, leukotrienes are produced by 5-LOX, or 5-LOX. These enhance vascular increased mucus production, vascular permeability, and bronchoconstriction. In summary, inflammation is a complex cascade of response to harmful stimuli such as pathogens, trauma, or chemicals. Prostaglandins can produce many unwanted effects such as inflammation. Yet they are also responsible for many beneficial effects to the body. Prostaglandins exert their effects by binding to prostaglandin receptors, of which there are 8 known subtypes. To regulate diverse physiological processes including inflammation, pain sensitization, smooth muscle contraction, and blood flow, different chemicals bind to these different receptors. The 8 primary types are DP, EP1 to EP4, FP, IP, and TP. EP receptors are 4 distinct G-protein coupled receptors. They bind to prostaglandin E, controlling functions like smooth muscle contraction, fever, inflammation, and cell proliferation. DP receptors mediate the effects of PGD, which is often involved in allergic inflammation and sleep regulation. FP receptors bind to PGF, largely involved in uterine muscle contraction and luteolysis. IP receptors bind to prostacyclin, promoting vasodilation and inhibiting platelet aggregation. Lastly, TP receptors bind to thromboxane A, inducing vasoconstriction and platelet aggregation. Now we move to your nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, or NSAIDs. These are the most widely used anti-inflammatory agents. NSAIDs primarily work by inhibiting prostacyclin production through the inhibition of COX enzymes. They produce anti-inflammatory, analgesic, antipyretic, and anticoagulant effects. So looking back at our graphical representation, we can see here that NSAIDs work by inhibiting prostaglandin production, by inhibiting COX-2 enzyme production. Thus, the cascade is prevented. NSAIDs are very effective, and unlike other anti-inflammatory drugs, they do not have any immunosuppressive effects. Generally, they are preferred over steroids for mild to moderate pain and inflammation. They avoid severe steroid-related side effects like weight gain, immunosuppression, and issues with blood sugar. NSAIDs can be classified as either non-selective, meaning they inhibit both COX-1 and COX-2 with different efficiencies, or COX-2 selective drugs. All non-selective NSAIDs, with the exception of aspirin, act as reversible COX inhibitors. We can further classify non-selective COX inhibitors into salicylates and related compounds, oxycams, phenamic acid derivatives, and propionic acids. Let us begin with salicylates. These are the foundational class of NSAIDs. They work by reversibly inhibiting COX enzymes, thereby reducing prostaglandin synthesis, though as we have already mentioned earlier, acetylsalicylic acid, or more commonly known as aspirin, is unique in its irreversible antiplatelet effect. The irreversible action of aspirin is most notable in blood platelet. Platelets cannot synthesize new enzymes because they don't have a nucleus. Once the enzyme is inactivated by aspirin, it can no longer produce thromboxane A2, hence cannot initiate platelet aggregation. This happens for the entire lifespan of the platelets. This makes aspirin stand out as a potent antithrombotic agent. In fact, aspirin is commonly prescribed to reduce risk of blood clot formation as a preventive measure for heart attack and ischemic stroke. For maximum effect, aspirin is not to be taken together with other non-selective NSAIDs, as these drugs will compete with aspirin for a common binding site on the platelet's COX. Being an antithrombotic, aspirin prolongs bleeding and is therefore contraindicated in patients with bleeding risks or hemorrhagic disorders. Salicylates and other related compounds are non-selective. They do not directly inhibit COX, but instead stop the induction of COX. While they are non-selective, they lean more towards inhibiting COX-1, thereby reducing thromboxane A2 and inhibiting platelet aggregation. These drugs are used for fever, pain, and inflammation. Examples of salicylates and other related compounds include sodium salicylate, magnesium salicylate, salsalate, salicylamide, methyl salicylate or oil of wintergreen, and salicylic acid. Next, we have your propionic acid derivatives. These are often called profens and are a major class of non-selective NSAIDs. They act as inflammatory, analgesic, and antipyretic agents by inhibiting COX. Examples include ibuprofen, locally known as Advil or Medicol, naproxen, popularly known as Skelan or Flanax, and ketoprofen, available as Fastum in gel form. Moving on, we have your oxycams. Oxycams are a class of NSAIDs used to treat acute and chronic pain. It is also used for inflammation and fever, such as in osteoarthritis and rheumatoid arthritis. Oxycams are known for having long half-lives. Examples include piroxicam, sold under the brand name Feldene, and meloxicam, marketed as Mobic. These drugs, however, have an increased risk for GI complications. In general, NSAIDs are either non-selective or COX-2 selective. However, some NSAIDs lean more on inhibiting COX-1, but not without some inhibition of COX-2. Ketorolac is widely recognized as having the highest COX-1 selectivity among NSAIDs. It can act up to 300 times more potently on COX-1 than COX-2. Other agents that tend to be more selective for COX-1 include flurbiprofen, under the brand name Strepsil Max Pro, available as lozenges for sore throat; ketoprofen, sold as a topical gel under the brand name Ketofen; indomethacin, also as a topical gel under the brand name V-Gel; and Sulindac under the brand name Clinoril. These agents generally offer higher anti-inflammatory action, but the oral and parenteral forms carry a higher risk of GI upsets. We now move on to COX-2 selective NSAIDs. The newer COX-2 specific NSAIDs are also known as COXIBs. They are designed to specifically target COX-2 enzymes. They reduce pain and inflammation while offering fewer stomach and intestinal issues than traditional NSAIDs. They are used for arthritis and acute pain. However, COXIB use is controversial. Studies have shown that COXIBs increase cardiovascular occlusive events. This is likely because they selectively inhibit COX-2-dependent prostacyclins, which is vasodilatory and antithrombotic, while having no effect on COX-1-dependent thromboxane A2, which is prothrombotic and vasoconstrictory. Thus, these drugs favor blood clot formation and vasoconstriction. Examples of COX-2 selective inhibitors include celecoxib, under the popular brand name Celebrex, and etoricoxib, under the brand name Arcoxia. Next, we move to your paracetamol. Technically, it is not a true anti-inflammatory drug. However, paracetamol is widely used as an over-the-counter analgesic and antipyretic. It is used to treat mild to moderate pain such as headaches, muscular ache, and toothache. I have included paracetamol in our discussion because it has a weak inhibitory effect on prostaglandin synthesis by being a non-selective COX inhibitor. Its main action, though, is on the central nervous system. It acts as an antipyretic in the hypothalamus and an analgesic by elevating pain threshold. Paracetamol is often recommended as a safer alternative for pain relief in patients with high-risk conditions or those who are prone to stomach issues. Now we move to your corticosteroids. Obviously, steroids are the opposite of NSAIDs or nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Corticosteroids are powerful synthetic drugs that mimic the natural steroid cortisol to reduce inflammation and suppress overactive immune responses. They work by binding to receptors in cells to inhibit inflammatory gene expression, decreasing pro-inflammatory cytokines, and shifting immune cell activity. Steroids inhibit phospholipase A2, thereby they reduce arachidonic acid release. They also reduce the production of cyclooxygenase 2. So again, we review our graphical representation and see that steroids act by inhibiting phospholipase A2. Thus, the entire cascade that follows this will not happen anymore. Very briefly, let us review cortisol. Cortisol is the natural steroid found in the body that is mimicked or copied by corticosteroids. Cortisol is a vital steroid hormone that is essential for regulating physiological responses and processes such as metabolism, immune function, and reproduction. Cortisol is produced in the adrenal gland. Remember that the adrenal gland has two parts: the cortex, which is the outer portion, and the medulla, which is found inside. Here we are focusing more on the cortex because it is the part that releases cortisol. Cortisol has many functions in the body, including blood glucose control, suppressing the immune system, and stimulating our fight or flight response. Corticosteroids are available in many different forms, such as oral tablets, injections like intramuscular, intravenous, or even intraarticular. We also have inhalers, which we will be discussing in a separate video on the drugs that affect the respiratory system, part of our series Learning Pharmacology with me, Nurse Myron. Lastly, we also have topical creams. Common side effects of steroids include weight gain, elevated blood sugar, high blood pressure, fluid retention, mood swings, insomnia, and increased infection risks. However, because corticosteroids come in various forms and are administered via different routes, side effects often depend on the route of administration. For example, oral corticosteroids, such as those available in tablets, pills, or liquids, have the highest risk for systemic side effects like osteoporosis, adrenal suppression, and diabetes, especially when used long-term. Inhaled corticosteroids, on the other hand, primarily cause local side effects like mouth infections, oral thrush, dryness of the mouth, sore throat, and hoarseness. Topical steroids like creams and ointments can cause thinning of the skin, stretch marks, and acne at the application site. Lastly, parenteral form of steroids can cause localized side effects like skin thinning or color changes near the injection site. Nursing responsibilities during the administration of anti-inflammatory drugs, including your NSAIDs and corticosteroids, involve assessment, monitoring, and patient education. Key areas include: in assessment, the nurse should conduct a thorough pain assessment using the PQRST model. This is done before and after administration of the drug. Likewise, the patient should assess for any contraindications through a thorough history and interview. These include GI ulcers, cardiovascular disease, renal, and hepatic impairments. During administration of oral NSAIDs, the nurse should give the drug with food or milk. This is done to prevent GI irritation. In monitoring, the patient should be made aware for any signs of GI bleeding, including dark tarry stools, known as hematochezia, or coffee ground emesis. Likewise, the nurse should monitor for any signs of nephrotoxicity, such as increased BUN and creatinine levels in laboratory results, reduced urine output, usually less than 30 ml per hour, or sudden weight gain and edema. For safety precautions, the nurse must regularly monitor blood pressure, as NSAIDs can sometimes cause hypertension. Lastly, patient education involves advising against taking multiple NSAIDs simultaneously and warning against excessive alcohol intake. This can increase gastrointestinal risk. That concludes our discussion on anti-inflammatories, including NSAIDs and corticosteroids. I hope that you learned a lot in our video presentation. Thank you and continue enjoying learning.